In a world where every whisper carries echoes of ancient secrets, and every shadow conceals untold mysteries, there emerges a voice that pierces the silence. A voice that resonates with the power of 1,000 angels, weaving tales that stretch beyond time and space. Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourselves for an audio experience entirely different than what was just described, because this is another episode of Have You Read This? With host Jason Morrison.
When I first started to plan out what exactly would be discussed here on the podcast, I had zero plans to talk about books that I didn't enjoy reading, that I DNF'd, or that I wouldn't recommend to anyone, even if my life depended on it. But today, that's all going to change. Because with this episode, I'm using my newfound power to absolutely obliterate any author who dares to even write some trash that I would not gift a 5-star review to. You will all be witnesses. Of course, I'm not going to do any of that. And there's a part of me that even has a hard time leaving reviews on sites like Goodreads in the first place. Trying to wrap my head around a scenario where some book has 20,000 reviews on it, but after what I had to write, someone thought, yep, this is it. This right here, this review by Jason, it's the review that it changed my life, the whole course of my life. It caused me to grab this book and read it. I feel even stronger about books that are considered classics, the ones that have tons and tons and tons of reviews. Really, what possibly can I say that hasn't already been said about some of these classics? Flowers for Algernon, for example. This was first published in 1966 and has nearly 31,000 reviews on Goodreads as of today. Are they just sitting there waiting on what I was thinking after I read it? I doubt it. More importantly, why is there always that one review where this person decided that instead of maybe, I don't know, writing their own book, they decided to try their hand at it in the review section, and they unleashed this 2,000 word essay, which reads more like they're trying to prove their ability to write than it does their expression of opinion about the book. I don't know. Maybe I'm just grumpy old man. The point that I'm trying to make here is that I don't want to badmouth books on this podcast. I've never written a book, but from hearing about the process from those that have, I have to respect the process. And one day, yeah, I want to tackle that. Just because I didn't like a book doesn't mean that I should spend 20 minutes on some podcast bashing it. After all, it's really just my opinion, right? On the flip side, since I liked a book, that automatically means that you have to read it because my opinion is the only one that matters, right? All that being said, when I get the chance to summarize some of the books that I've read over the previous month, I don't think it's too far out there to say which ones I would recommend reading and which ones I would say, okay, you should probably stay away from this one. Last month, I finished 12 books. Some of them were print and some I listened to via audiobook. Now, a couple years ago, when I was chasing the 100 book per year mark, I would have really gone back and said, okay, I've got to read this many books per week and I've got to keep this going. I don't have any of those plans now. I want to be continuously reading, and if a book takes me a little while to get through, so be it. I'm not trying to hit a certain number. That being said, I was kind of astonished that I got through 12 books last month. Those books were Sandy Hook by Elizabeth Williamson, Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw, Making a Psychopath, My Journey into 7 Dangerous Minds by Mark Freestone, Unmasked, My Life Solving America's Cold Cases by Paul Holes, Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk, and I am 100% certain that I screwed his last name up. And you'd think that as much as I love Fight Club, I could get that right, or even do just a tiny little bit of research to see how the guy pronounces his last name. But no, not on this podcast. I also read This Is Going to Hurt, Secret Diaries of a Junior Director by Adam Kay, The Psychopath Test, A Journey Through Madness Industry by John Ronson. The Demon in the Freezer by Richard Preston. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Blank by Mark Manson. The Ends of the World, Supervolcanoes, Lethal Oceans, and The Search for Past Apocalypses by Peter Brannon. Blood Meridian, or The Evening Redness in the West by Cormac McCarthy. And also A History of Wild Places by Shay Earnshaw. And again, Shay, that is S-E-A-H. I have no idea how to pronounce that. And of course, I didn't bother to look it up. That's why we've got show notes, so that you can click and avoid my terrible mispronunciations of names. I've been giving audiobooks another shot. Tried them a while back, and I thought, this is terrible. I have to hold a printed copy in my hand. I can't listen to a book. For some reason lately, fiction has been more difficult for me to follow in an audiobook format. So I think for now, I'm going to stick with nonfiction versions. I wish I could explain why that is, but for some reason, my brain just allows me to focus more on nonfiction stories than fiction stories when I'm listening to them. The audiobook that stood out the most to me this past month was Sandy Hook by Elizabeth Williamson. When I started this book, I honestly was expecting something more along the lines of Columbine by Dave Cullen. I don't know if you've read that book, but that was fantastic. Way more detail than I had expected. And the same with this one. What I got was much more different and actually probably a sign of the times or pending apocalypse, and probably honestly a little of both. From the Goodreads synopsis, it says about this book, one of the nation's most devastating mass shootings, Sandy Hook was used to create destructive and painful myths. Driven by ideology or profit, or for no sound reason at all, some people insisted it never occurred, or was staged by the federal government as a pretext for seizing Americans' firearms. They tormented the victims' relatives online, accosted them in the street, and at memorial events, accusing them of faking their loved ones' murder. And that is a very gentle overview of what happened, because when you get into the details of this book, it's honestly one of the most infuriating things one of the most infuriating books that I have ever read. And a good portion of it focuses on Alex Jones and InfoWars and provides a ton of details and research that I was not aware of, a lot of which has resulted from some of the litigation that's taken place. There was so much detail, in fact, that at times I honestly had to stop listening to this book because it was infuriating me. It was making me so mad that these people were, not only did they have to lose their child in probably one of the most horrific ways that you could lose a child, and then they were literally attacked for it. And there's one family where they have been documented that they had to move. They had to move 7 times in an attempt to stop the harassment. And again, harassment is putting it very lightly. Attack is probably more of an accurate statement. I felt like I was given a side of the story that I had no idea even existed, and it sickened me. I would highly recommend reading this one simply for its eye-opening potential. It's one of those books that I feel like we need the awareness and the knowledge that comes from all of the research and the history that has taken place from such a tragic event and something as tragic that happened after it. So if you're a true crime junkie, you'll most likely enjoy Unmasked by Paul Holes. There's a ton of detail about how he helped eventually catch the Golden State Killer using DNA. Lots of case details in the book that make it a worthwhile read for anyone that prefers this genre. I have to admit that Michelle McNamara's book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, is probably a better start if the Golden State Killer is the topic that you're more interested in. That being said, Unmasked really goes through a lot of cold cases, and it goes through his personal life, how it suffered and some successes that he had, and basically his journey throughout law enforcement and specifically solving cold cases. Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian seems to always show up on the darkest books ever written lists, at least the ones that I've come across. Now, I've read a few of his books, with The Road being probably one of my all-time favorites of his, and maybe even all-time favorite books ever. I'd probably do an episode about it here, but I'm guessing that a million people have already talked about it, and there's a movie, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I read this one while I was out of town, and honestly, I kind of have mixed feelings about it. It's the usual McCarthy writing style where he just... This guy does what he wants in terms of lack of quotations. The characters aren't really named in any kind of, I guess, rememberable way. And he loves to use run-on sentences, the length of an entire page. But hey, it works. I'm certainly not bad-mouthing this book. However, I felt like it drug out probably too long, and also felt that one of the most interesting characters wasn't even the main character at all, which I thought was kind of odd. It does have some pretty brutal moments, which is probably why it keeps making those lists of darkest books ever written, but there was nothing in this book that made me put it down and think, oh my gosh, this is so terrible. I can't believe somebody wrote this. And you have to keep in mind that my brain has been numbed to this stuff over the years. So what may not shock me could very well shock you. That being said, his books are, in my opinion, always worth reading. I love his storytelling. I love how he wraps up stories. I love how sometimes he doesn't. He's just a fantastic author, and to me, one of the very few that I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that I read every single thing that he has ever written. The Demon in the Freezer by Richard Preston. This one was a surprise to me. This was released in 2002, and it's a great dive into the magical, wonderful world of bioweapons, specifically smallpox. And this, my friends, is why we read, because I had no idea really what smallpox was, much less what happens to people when exposed to it, and I had no idea the level of just absolute terribleness that is smallpox. If bioweapons and that entire world is something that terrifies you, then this book is certainly not going to do much to help you sleep at night. In fact, after reading this, I have to wonder what terrible things have been created and are now stored in labs and are in the hands of people that probably shouldn't even have them to begin with. You can count on one thing, that smallpox, the only thing that I think is worse than smallpox is most likely seeing Madonna live in concert in 2023, 2024. The Ends of the World by Peter Brannon was a fantastic read. And Brannon's writing was perfect for me. I loved his pacing. He has a great sense of humor that comes out in his writing. The topic that he was writing about, however, was so far over my head that I felt like I needed to go back to school all over again. Like, I feel like some of this stuff I should have known and remembered, but my brain, especially at my advanced age, doesn't have a lot of capacity to hold older information. It just somewhat gets formatted and shifted off to the cloud, and I never have access to it again. So from Goodreads, because Goodreads is going to be able to explain something this intelligent far better than I can, right? It says, our world has ended 5 times. 6 if you include the Breaking Bad finale. Just kidding. It has been broiled, frozen, poison gassed, smothered, and pelted by asteroids. In The Ends of the World, Peter Brannon dives into deep time, exploring Earth's past dead ends and in the process offers us a glimpse of our possible future. And honestly, I am really too dumb to explain any more about this book. Just know it is one of those books that absolutely anybody can read. And by that, I mean, it doesn't matter what genre of book you prefer. I think you'll enjoy this one. I mean, unless, of course, that you like romance novels or Kesha's music. But then at that point, there's really not much hope for you anyway. Now, I ended up giving Nothing But Blackened Teeth a shot as it showed up in an email newsletter that I get from Libby. It was a short one. I think it was like a 3-hour audiobook. And I got to say, the person speaking did probably one of the best jobs narrating a book that I have ever read. But the contents of the book, just for me, it felt pretty short. And I gave this one a shot despite seeing some pretty low ratings on Goodreads. And honestly, I wish that I would have just skipped this one. And my oldest daughter said, "Oh yeah, I saw that you marked that one as read. What did you think about it?" And I said, just take that one off your TBR. You're not going to miss anything. I really hate taking a giant dump on anyone's hard work in writing a book, but just like a Motley Crue reunion, this should be avoided at all costs. Another thing I wanted to mention here was that I ventured out of my comfort zone a bit recently, and I attended a local book club event that was hosted by Third Turn Brewing here in Louisville. And this was hosted by James Markert. We all got to sit down and listen to him interview David Domine about his latest book, A Dark Room in Glitterball City: Murder, Secrets, and Scandal in Old Louisville. Did you know that Louisville is where the glitter ball or disco ball originated? Yeah, me either. Probably one of the least important facts to have hit my brain that night. And this is probably something that everyone else here in the city already knows. I'm glad that I could be the last person to finally get clued in. I knew absolutely nothing about this group, the authors, or even how to follow one-way signs into the parking lot, apparently. Hopefully nobody saw me barreling in the wrong direction as I was trying to make this book club in time. Once I was inside and I got settled, I had grabbed a couple of the books that were being sold, found a spot on a couch, and I have to say that I honestly had low expectations for the night. I was there by myself and I felt out of place for some reason, and I felt somewhat isolated from about the 30 people that were there. But when I talked to the host, he put it really simple in terms of their goal. He said, "We just want to connect authors to readers." So I thought, well, I guess I am actually in the right place after all. And what I found after they got started talking and broke the ice and started to dig deeper into the conversation, the evening just kept getting better and better and better. And by the time I checked my watch, I had been there for an hour and a half, and it felt like I just got lost in these stories being shared by David. One of the things that I think was a big advantage for him is that when he was writing his most recent book, his 13th, if you can imagine that, I haven't even had the dedication to sit down and plan out a book, and this guy has written 13. But one of the advantages that he had is that he lives in the area where this story took place, and he knows so many people there. And I could have just listened to him share story after story after story, and I could have done that all night. It was fantastic, and it made me even more excited about reading this latest book of his. From Goodreads, on June 18th, 2010, police discover a body buried in the wine cellar of a Victorian mansion in Old Louisville. James Carroll, shot and stabbed the year before, has lain for 7 months in a plastic storage bin, his temporary coffin. Homeowner Jeffrey Munt and his boyfriend Joseph Bannis point the finger at each other in what locals dub the Pink Triangle murder. Many people in the room knew several, if not all of the people involved in the story, which I thought was another interesting aspect of it. that makes this story far more intriguing to me, and I'm sure it made it more intriguing to them. And when this evening, when it was all said and done, I got to meet two authors. I got to pick up a few more books, like my TBR needs that, right? And I got further connected to a new group of people who seem to love reading and storytelling every bit as much as I do. So for anyone in the Louisville area, if you're interested in looking up one of these specific events, I'd encourage you to look up Book Social 502 on Instagram. As for all of the books that I have read in October, if there's any of those that stand out that you want to read or mark off your list as this guy is a psycho and I'm not reading anything that he suggests, don't worry. I'll put a whole list of those in the show notes along with how to connect with Book Social 502. Maybe you're not here in Louisville. Maybe you're wanting to start something like this. I'm sure that they would be willing to give you some advice on how to do something like this in your area, which I think is really fantastic. I'm already excited about what's coming up in November, and especially because it appears that it is all horror writers that are coming to a local brewery. And lastly, I want to mention that if you have any book suggestions that you'd like to send my way, send them to reviews@haveyoureadthispodcast.com. Make sure you follow me, blah, 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 all that crap. Stay tuned for the next episode, which hopefully will be coming out, I'm guessing, in another week or so. I'm going to be talking about an event that happened in the 80s that when I first found out about it, it sounded entirely made up and fictional. And then turns out there was actually a book written about this event, and it actually did happen. And I seriously still to this day cannot believe that this happened, and it's proof that sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Until next time.
Oh, look, another podcast begging for followers and 5-star reviews. Because clearly your life won't be complete without their riveting discussions about what books they think are worth reading. But really, it doesn't take a lot of time to write a glowing review, and follow me on Instagram does it. It is quick and painless, so just do it, and bask in the glow of knowing you have contributed to the endless void of self-indulgent online content. Oh, by the way, sign up for the newsletter while you're at it. Link in bio and all that crap.